All right, let's talk with Tyler Donohue, covers Penn State for 24/7 Sports. And Tyler, I know we talked in the offseason about how high expectations were for Penn State. I would imagine after the first two games, those expectations increase even just a little bit.
I think so, because now you go from imagination with Drew Allar to evidence with Drew Allar, and that changes everything. James Franklin brought that up in his press conference this week about how he feels like that's going to force opposing defensive coordinators beginning this week to really have to pick their poison. He says you understand why in week one West Virginia would want to load up on that rush game and slow down Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, who combined for almost 2,000 rushing yards as true freshmen and did some wonderful things. And West Virginia had some success there, but Drew Allar looked like the five-star prospect that he was coming out of high school. And ultimately, that day threw for 325 yards, was 21 of 29 passing, had 4 touchdown passes, and then shows up in this past game against Delaware, and you just want to see him go out and again look the part. He ends up completing 14 of his first 15 throws. So it faced a little bit of pressure, adjusted the pocket as we've seen him do, which is really an impressive part of his makeup thus far, and ability to kind of just manipulate things behind the line of scrimmage while finding a receiver downfield. And through a couple of games now, he's at about 85% accuracy. He's around 530 passing yards, 5 touchdowns. He rushed for a touchdown last week. And the big thing here is no turnovers. There's been only one ball by my count that has even really been up for grabs for a defensive back. And that was against West Virginia. It happened in the end zone, so it was a dangerous spot to do it. But receiver Keandre Lambert-Smith played defensive back in that case, batted the ball down to the ground. And now we have a 12-game sample size with Drew Allar playing at this level of football. And last year, 10 games, it was, depending on what was happening, the snap count may have not been that large, but Jeremy, 0 turnovers. So I think that's a big thing. They would take the turnovers with a talent like Drew Allar, with the big arm, the 6'5", 240-pound frame. You can stomach and digest a couple bad throws because of everything else he brings to the field. But I think really the stunning thing right now when people are evaluating, and it's West Virginia, it's Delaware. We'll see, big test this week on the road, first Big Ten start. But the ability to not put the ball in harm's way. And this is a very good Penn State defense. I know that you have a lot of respect for what the Nittany Lions do under Manny Diaz. That's who he faced all of August. They love the iron sharpens iron deal here. So they go a lot 1 versus 1. By all accounts, we heard it from defensive players. We heard from James Franklin. Took until practice 13 in live periods where they were able to get a takeaway off Drew Allar. And I thought that was big time. And from what we hear, only 2 total turnovers, intercepted passes by Drew Allar over the course of preseason camp. So it's not a mirage. It's something that's been consistent since he got to campus.
So Sean Clifford was a good quarterback, right? I mean, he get drafted in the 5th round and win as many games as he did, but Drew Allar feels like another level. What does he give them that Sean Clifford did not? And what does Drew do to this offense that Sean Clifford could not?
I just think physically you're talking about is a different component in your backfield right now, because again, 6'5", 240 plus pounds right now, and he's carrying that well. He actually seemed to cut a little bit of maybe what we call baby fat, this offseason. So he's in a good spot. When he's had to run, he's been able to do that, but bigger than that, he's been able to just move the pocket laterally, which I think is an important part of his game. But Sean Clifford, I think one thing about him is as impressive of the effort. I mean, 4-time team captain, and he always put it all on the line. He would take some physical punishment, and it would always feel like by the time you got into mid-October, you were working with maybe 75%, if that, of what Sean Clifford was coming into the season. And that's because he would take his chances. He would scramble for some runs, and he would stand there and take shots. And this offensive line wasn't always at a very high level during his career. So I think the big thing here is Drew Allar should be well suited physically and just with the offensive line they have in front of him to make it through this season intact and be able to be a force in November. But also with Drew, I mean, that arm talent is just, you only see a few of those arms each class, and you never know how that arm's going to match up with the brain, right, Jeremy? So in Drew Allar's case, so far, that's a good connection. But the point is, he can pick up a football, whether he's in shorts or whether he's in pads, and it's 108,000 people in the stadium watching him. and he can sling that thing to pretty much any blade of grass on the field. And that's just different than anyone who's, been throwing the ball for James Franklin. You can look back to the 5-star talent like Christian Hackenberg. Franklin inherited him as a sophomore. It didn't work out for him in the long term. But I think right now you're just truly looking at the people that we trust in the 24/7 sports scouting department. I watched them elevate this young man from a 3-star prospect when Mike Yursich offered him, early on. I think it was the spring coming out of his junior year. And by the time he signed with Penn State, he was considered the #1 overall quarterback recruit in the country, and I think a top 3 player overall in America. And so what we're seeing unfold through 120 minutes of football, he only played about 6 of those quarters fully, but it has looked the part. And I think that you're right. Sean Clifford, there's a lot of respect for him. I think that respect will grow the further we get away from it, because there was some angst that maybe Drew Allar was missing, a guy like Drew Allar was missing, and that was preventing this team from reaching the college football playoff. But I think the other thing to note here, it sounds like Drew Allar is very even keel. And Sean Clifford could be a bit mercurial, especially early in his career when he stepped up as a redshirt sophomore. It was a little bit series by series, especially early. You kind of had to take the temperature of Sean Clifford in the first quarter of games, and that would kind of dictate what you might get the rest of the way. It feels like Drew Allar, just in speaking with him during his high school career when all the craziness was going around his recruitment, and now through a couple of years of hype here in Happy Valley, not take anything away from Sean Clifford, who just led that way and it worked for him. This guy just seems to be, what you're going to get a bit more in that department when you turn to him. But let's see what happens when they start, trailing in some games late, or what happens when he starts taking bunches of sacks. That'll be the next test.
I see the Saquon Barkley jersey behind you, Penn State, with that great running back tradition. And boy, they got 2 really talented ones, Nick Singleton, Kaytron Allen. How would you just evaluate the weapons Penn State has around Drew Allar and how they use them?
Yeah, so I mean, I came to this beat when Saquon Barkley was in his final year here, and then Miles Sanders stepped up, and I know people kind of forget it, but Journey Brown had a phenomenal half season there before he had a heart condition that sidelined him. But we've never seen 2 of these guys at the same time paired together, rotating together, and that's what we saw all of last season. If you recall, Jeremy, in 2021, that Illinois game was a big part of it. Penn State couldn't run the football. I mean, and it was game by game by game. They played Villanova that year, and they averaged fewer than 3 yards per carry. Everyone from that backfield, it was a star-studded recruiting standpoint backfield, but guys weren't producing. The offensive line was in a bad shape. Bunch of them have transferred out, and they've ended up at Power 5 programs. And a reason they've transferred out is because Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen showed up last January and just sprinted to obvious jobs at the head of this thing. Nick Singleton set a touchdown record for freshmen last year with 14 of them for this program. He went over 1,000 yards. Only 3 freshman running backs have done that in program history. And then Kaytron Allen, just about to 900 rushing yards, and he had himself 10 touchdowns. So that's just the freshman sample size. And now we're into this year, and the question becomes, how can you keep them both happy in today's day and age, where the NIL conversation is always out there, and what are you missing potentially in the NIL landscape nationally if you're a 1A or a 2 versus being the bell cow running back of a program like this? And so that's something that they're working their way through. Nick Singleton has a little bit more star power. He was the Big Ten Freshman of the Year last year. He was the Gatorade National Player of the Year in high school, and he played high school football here in Pennsylvania. So a lot of notoriety, where Kaytron Allen, Virginia product, goes down to IMG Academy, star there, and then comes up here, and he was kind of like, oh, there's another running back in this class that's good. And so I think he's still maybe dealing with shaking that off. Last week we saw them make a concerted effort. They started Kaytron Allen after starting Singleton in week 1. He went for 100 plus yards. He carried the ball 19 times. I don't know if we thought that was going to happen for either of these guys against Delaware, but it's worth noting here, Jeremy, that 19 touches is the second most that Kaytron Allen has had in a game. He has capped out at 21 carries, and Nick Singleton has never even gotten to 21 carries in his career. So what they've done thus far through 15 games of these guys playing together, it's taken some finesse. And I know there's been conversations behind closed doors. I think just everybody's got to make sure the egos are in check and everyone's in the right mentality to carry this thing together. But they're keeping the light load on these guys. And I think that's really where you see them surface, whether it's Nick Singleton racing 60 yards in the fourth quarter against a defense that's worn down, or Kaytron Allen just boom, boom, boom. That's kind of who he is, falling forward, never seeming to be stopped short of 5 yards on a carry. So it's been a really nice balance thus far. And again, the biggest test of this year thus far lies ahead against Illinois. But Jaywan Slater, the running backs coach, you've got to tip your cap, because there's a lot of coaching staffs in the country that I just don't know if they'd be able to manage it to this point. Winning always helps, but it's a lot when we talk about modern college football and that running back position specifically.
2 years ago, Illinois went to Penn State and beat them in that classic 9 overtime game, if we want to call it that, because they absolutely owned the trenches. Like, Illinois lost the turnover battle 3-0, but they won the rushing battle 357-62. Penn State is a different program in the trenches, right? Like, what has changed so much for them, both on the offensive and defensive fronts?
Well, Phil Trautwein, the offensive line coach, former team captain, former starting offensive tackle with the Florida Gators, he has really been able to recruit and develop. That was, I guess, the start. That was early on in year 3 of his time on campus, or year 2 on his time on campus. Year 1, he inherited a group that wasn't the best, blue chip stockpile, and it was also COVID. So he didn't really get to work hands on with them. So I think we were judging Phil in 2021 with kind of one hand tied behind his back. And to James Franklin's credit, didn't really seem to waver with Phil Trautwein. Now we're in year 4, and that room is a strength of this team. It's pretty crazy to say it's not been the case. And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, because we want to see if it's a strength in 2023. It was definitely a strength by the end of 2022. I think this week and then next week when Iowa comes to Happy Valley, we'll tell a lot about where the offensive line is. But Phil Trautwein has obviously a major component in Olu Fashanu. A lot of people believe he might be the first offensive lineman off the board next year's draft. People thought he would have been a first-round pick this past year. So to have him back, he had only started 9 career games coming into this season. So we haven't seen a ton of him, but what we have seen has been dominance at left tackle. And they've got a right tackle in Caden Wallace, who's played a ton of football. He's a former top 100 prospect, but he's in year 5. And it's very much been, where's the consistency? Is this guy going to ultimately be just an average to subpar right tackle in games against big-time defensive ends? He's made a lot of strides this year. He stabilized himself as the starting right tackle, and thus far he looks like a different animal. So to me, if they have bookend tackles, what you've got on the left side, that's another step forward for this offensive line. And the question, though, a little bit, I think they lost Juice Scruggs, who was one of the best centers in the Big Ten last year, has a prominent role with the Houston Texans as a rookie. And I think right now Hunter Norzad's still in the evaluation period. He's the guy who came in from the Ivy League last year, played a lot of football at left guard for them. But now he is as a 6th-year college player playing a new position. He actually was a tackle at the Ivy League level. So I just want to keep seeing him take steps there. And he's been dealing with bumps and bruises, according to James Franklin. He only played maybe half the snaps at center last week after starting. He was one of the guys that they were able to get to the sideline pretty quickly while piling it on Delaware. And then the other question mark, I think, here is JB Nelson. There's a chance that he could prove to be one of the boom players for them on offense. He's a Lackawanna College product out of the junior college level last year. Now he's playing left guard. Landon Tengwall, a former big-time prospect, had to retire in August because of issues medical related. And so with JB Nelson, the word we're getting is nastiness, finisher. We've seen it flash in game film. There's been some viral video from some of his early work on social media. And this is the exact kind of thing that years ago, when James Franklin was kind of publicly lamenting about the status of his offensive line and big matchups, he said he wanted to find that nastiness, that aggression. I think they've developed that. They've got the talent. They were able to get 10 guys, 25-plus snaps against Delaware, so the depth is pretty seasoned. They've got legitimate backups at a lot of these spots. So it is a very different team. I know to spend all the time on the offensive line, but I've got to say the offensive line and the running game was the problem in 2021. And I know that particular game, and then last year against Michigan, it was that run defense was an issue. And that looks a lot different because of the depth they bring on the defensive line. I'll just point to the defensive line right now, though. 2 question marks that we're going to keep an eye on in pregame warmups here. Number 99, Keziah Izzard. Is he out there with the team for this Big Ten opener? We haven't seen him in the first couple games. He's a guy that we projected as at least a co-starter, probably a starter going into the season. 300-pound defensive tackle, has put on weight, has been pointed to as a player who's going to be counted on against the run. He hasn't played through the first couple games. We're not sure why. He has been present with the team. We've seen him in some capacity and practice facilities. And then the other is Amin Vanover, who we had pegged as the 4th defensive end or 5th defensive end. Either way, a guy who's going to play quite a bit. He has not played either. He has been practicing, but James Franklin has kept things close to the vest on both those guys. I would consider them 2 important rotational pieces at the very least, One of those maybe a starter at defensive tackle. So if they resurface for Illinois, it's a big bump for a group that's handled itself pretty well through 2 games. If they don't, then that's maybe a bit of a warning sign for what they're going to be challenged by with the Illini, because I know Brett Bielema has to want to establish that team on the ground, at least at the start of this game, and test Penn State inside. But Manny Diaz has really shored things up, and I know that whenever he talks about that Michigan game from last year where they just got boat raced, and a lot of that was just runs up the middle, they got gashed, and linebackers were responsible there, and defensive tackles were responsible there. It was a group effort. Manny Diaz just gets this sour look on his face. And so I know that he's doing everything he can look to avoid it. And this will be one I think Penn State fans have been pointing to really since the summer and saying, we'll believe it when we see it against a team like Illinois.
I want to take a minute and tell you about Home Field. They are a premium collegiate apparel brand based in Indianapolis. They emphasize their commitment to creating incredibly comfortable, officially licensed apparel with vintage college designs. They feature a growing collection of over 150 plus colleges to choose from, including, of course, the University of Illinois. Home Field designs are super unique, guys, because they delve into the archives and history of each school, including Illinois, and these unique logos and iconic moments create thoughtfully designed apparel. So if you go to homefieldapparel.com, you can see the 80s Illini football helmet that so many like, Flying Illini logo, the Illinois basketball logo from the 2004-2005 Illini team. The script Illini is there. And you guys, these are the most comfortable shirts. And that's what I love about Home Field Apparel. You get the comfort, but you also get authenticity and nostalgia. So I'm telling you guys, give their site a look. It's not the typical Illinois gear you usually see. You can find them at homefieldapparel.com, where you can see their collection of colleges available. And guess what? Our listeners at Illini Inquirer get 15% off their first order with discount code Illini23. Again, 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com with discount code Illini23. So, as you go to Illinois football games, get ready for the Illinois basketball season, Home Field Apparel is the perfect apparel to get you ready for the upcoming season. So check them out at homefieldapparel.com. I'm very excited to announce a new partnership with Underdog Fantasy. We decided to partner with Underdog because it's the easiest place to play fantasy sports. It's also the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. Underdog Fantasy has a lot to offer, including their Pick'em game. In Pick'em, you pick whether your favorite players will have a higher or lower stat total in this week's game for a chance to win big. It's so easy to play. Just pick 2 to 5 stats of your favorite players and choose whether they'll go higher or lower. You can more than 20 times your amount of money by going 5 for 5. They also have a Best Ball Mania. If you think you know football, you got to check this one out. This year's Best Ball Mania has $50 million in total prizes up for grabs, with the winner taking home $3 million. So sign up today with promo code Illini and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store. And don't forget to register with my promo code Illini to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. You must be 18 plus and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-522-4700 or visit ncpgambling.org. The Big Ten West always provides some good defenses that Illinois is going to get challenged by, whether it's Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin. But this is the most talented defense. They will play all year. You know, I'm doing my preview, and it's like, oh, this guy's a top 5 NFL draft prospect at his position. Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, Curtis Jacobs, Kalen King, and Abdul Carter had a phenomenal freshman year. What has made, outside the talent, what makes Manny Diaz's defense so good? I guess the talent's got to be a big part of that. But.
Yeah, I think he's confident in the talent and confident that the guys are all well adjusted to his scheme now in year 2, that he'll throw 25 to 30 defenders at you, just normal. Not against Delaware where you expect that. Like against Illinois, you're going to see a bunch of defensive players used. I mean, we kind of had the conversations about starters and how we're going to list depth chart. It doesn't matter at a lot of these positions. Defensive end's a great spot to point to, because you mentioned Adisa Isaac, who came back for an extra year here with the program, and then Chop Robinson, who a lot of people are projecting as a first-round pick. But Denai Dennis Sutton may have the highest ceiling of all of them. He's a sophomore. He's a former 5-star prospect, and he's the guy who's dominated on the practice field. And I'm excited to see him get more run this year. And at linebacker, that's where I think we've seen really a big change of things under Manny Diaz and the way these guys are attacking and how they're being utilized, because Curtis Jacobs at the same position opposite of Abdul Carter has been a really nice move. They moved Curtis Jacobs back to the Sam to make room for Abdul in the starting lineup last year, and boy, did that pay off. He was a freshman All-American. He entered the starting lineup in October and never looked back. And I want to see if Abdul Carter, he's to me a guy from the linebacker position who could reach double-digit sacks here as a sophomore. It's a part of Micah Parsons' game that we never got to see unleashed. I think it would have happened as a junior, but he opted out and went to the NFL. And now we see what he does as a pass rusher. We didn't get to see it here at Penn State. Abdul Carter has shown that he had 6 sacks last year as a freshman. So something to monitor there as they attack the Illini. And I think at middle linebacker, they found a guy there in Kobe King that they really like. It was a bit of a seesaw position last year. And I think that they've kind of stabilized it. And Kalen King, in my opinion, I think a lot of people who cover this team closely, is a better all-around football prospect than Joey Porter Jr. was at the cornerback position. Porter had a lot of accolades, rightly so, and he had the name because of his father. But you look at what Kalen King has done through 2 years, and last year getting picked on, or people tried to pick on him with Joey Porter, and then when Porter goes down late, he becomes the guy, and he was phenomenal. Go look at what he did in the Rose Bowl and how he helped shut things down that first half. And but he's not alone back there. I think you got to keep an eye on. They're going to use 4 safeties. They're going to use 3 cornerbacks with regularity, and it would be 4 because another name to know here is Taquan Hardy. He's a third-year starter in the cornerback slot kind of coverage role. But we don't know if he's going to be available. He's been practicing. Again, we don't know. He wasn't out there for the first 2 games. We know he's with the team. So 3 veteran defensive players. The way this team has played, I don't know if it matters if they're not out there, but I think this is not the time for Penn State to be lacking depth. I think there's a lot of just pause by Penn State fans, and I think those of us who cover the team, and saying, let's see the defense go up against a team that wants to punch you in the mouth a few times, has the horses to do that to start the game, and see how they respond. And it's an all hands on deck situation, which is why I think a lot of us believe that those players may be resurfacing just in time for this one.
So Tyler, what's this game mean for Penn State, and what must they do to avoid the upset?
It means, it's the next test. It's the next peeling back of the curtain for what we believe is the championship contender here in the Big Ten, and a team that can get to the college football playoff for the first time in school history. And a lot of folks who, including my colleague Mark Brennan, who's covered the team now 36 years, believe this is the deepest and most talented roster they've had since 1994, when they were unbeaten, and a lot of people thought they were robbed of a chance to compete for a national championship that year. So that's a long time. That's a lot of history that's happened at Penn State in between then and now. So I think through the first 2 games, unless you want to be a miserable Penn State fan who likes to wallow, you can't really poke holes in a lot of what we saw through 2 games. They took care of business against West Virginia, won by 23, and then blasted the doors off of Delaware, probably more than we even anticipated, while playing a ton of players and only having 42 defensive snaps. And so I think now it is, can you go on the road in the Big Ten and look like a superior conference team? Are you going to go out there, and is it going to be hanging in the balance in the fourth quarter? Because that, even if they were able to pull away with a win and come home with 3-0, that would cause some concern around here. I think it would be good because it would mean they'd pass an adversity test. But you want to look at this matchup, and based on what we've seen from Illinois for 2 games, this is not the team that started 7-1 last year, and you kind of have to distance yourself a little bit from 2022 at this point on the calendar. So it looks like a team in Illinois, based on what I've seen from them, based on what we've seen from Penn State, that Penn State should be able to handle. And we thought that a couple of years ago. As it turned out, that Penn State team in some different ways was kind of a house of cards, and it was falling apart before our eyes in that Illinois game, and that continued for the remainder of the way. I don't get the sense that this feels like a very sturdy foundation for what Penn State wants to accomplish. But yeah, this is if they want to avoid the upset, I think they just got to trust in their back and give him an opportunity to go out there and win. My anticipation is Illinois is going to focus on the rushing attack and say, okay, Drew Allar, are you going to do it in your first Big Ten road game? We're going to force you to do it. I think he will. I think this is going to be another step in the right direction for Drew Allar. And that's ultimately why I believe that Penn State's going to be able to come away with this one and not need to be on pins and needles down the stretch in the fourth quarter because of what Allar will do. Here's a pretty interesting stat. They've only completed 1 pass downfield that has traveled beyond 20 yards. And I think that changes this week. It's been elite passing at the short, intermediate level. I'm telling you, we watch this guy put the ball on a receiver's chest along the sideline. It is there in a split second. You'll see it for yourself. It looks different in person than a lot of quarterbacks you've seen and that I've seen. But what I would like to see, and a lot of people want to see, is that can you put the ball in the breadbasket 40 yards down the field and use the speed of a guy like Keandre Lambert-Smith and a Harrison Wallace on the perimeter versus just, picking up those 8 to 12-yard chunks. And I think that will be tested. I think Drew Allar will come through, and Mike Yurcich has just been playing some things closer to the vest than I think a lot of people realize. And I think the passing game will be the big story. I don't know if Penn State's going to be able to find the balance they want to on the ground if Illinois has its way from run defense perspective, and I think they have the talent to do that. But I just don't know that Illinois can then find the counter to what Drew Allar brings. And maybe that's what separates Penn State. Maybe you don't have such a strong counterpunch from Penn State if it's a Sean Clifford, even as a sixth-year senior last year. It just feels like they'll be able to land more haymakers through the air than in years past. And I think they'll have enough offensive line protection to give him the time to buy that.
Tyler, before I let you go, James Franklin, I looked this up, second longest tenured coach in the Big Ten, ninth longest tenured coach in Power 5 right now.
Wow.
It's kind of crazy to think of. And we know, Bill O'Brien did a fantastic job in the circumstances there, but how would you kind of describe, his tenure, his relationship with the fan base? Because, it's at times it's felt a little, like it's going to fall apart at some time, or he might leave, but now he's got his best team and the expectations seem as high as ever.
Like any strong relationship, I think it's had its peaks and valleys, and it's been endured by both parties, right? I mean, there's been moments where we thought James Franklin was on the chopping block because they weren't winning games. I think they were 16-14 through his first 30 games, and they had some nasty blowouts early in that season where they ended up winning the Big Ten title in 2016. And then they had a run where they were winning 11 games, competing for championships, and all of a sudden in COVID, 0-5 start. I mean, we're never going to wrap our heads around what 2020 was, but Penn State went from a top 10 team, and you say, okay, 9 games. Yeah. Can you figure out a way to get to a college football playoff? They went 0-5, and it was miserable. And James Franklin's daughter, because of some medical conditions, that whole family was relocated 1,000 miles away. And he openly said he was having a hard time that year. So, and then all of a sudden they're winning again, and USC is going to come poach him away and pay him all this money and give him a private jet. So it has been here and there. But at the end of the day, he has brought a stability to this team and a winning culture to this team as they've racked up these 11 win seasons and New Year's 6 wins that I don't think any of us anticipated. I wasn't covering this team when things went down in the last decade and kind of reset how Penn State was viewed. But I remember thinking, I don't think Penn State's going to be a viable top 10 program for a while. And of course, just 4 years later, I think it was, they win the Big Ten championship. And I think that did wonders for James Franklin, but it also did him a bit of a disservice because then people thought they needed to be beating Ohio State every year. And they haven't beaten Ohio State since then. They just happen to be wedged into what I believe has been consistently the best division in college football. We look at the last 5, 6, 7 years now, and they've got to face Michigan every year. They've got to face Ohio State every year, and there's just no way around that fact. Now, that changes after this season. Penn State doesn't have those rivals, so that's tied to them going forward in the Big Ten schedule. But that's been part of the consternation, I guess, is when people look at James Franklin, they kind of echo what he said a few years back. Is this guy a great to elite coach? And, because he said he wants to take the program from great to elite back in 2018 after they had a 1-point loss to Ohio State. This feels like the moment for them to get there. It felt like maybe they were trending in the right direction before COVID brought the hammer down and brought a big monsoon over here and put that out. But I think right now it feels like a launch pad kind of season. If they can seize it, especially since Drew Allar's only a sophomore, it's going to impact the way they can recruit. It's going to impact the way they can support things with an NIL perspective. And it's going to impact their perception where they stand. Look at how Michigan has changed the narrative around them and their relationship with Ohio State. Penn State can go up to Columbus this year and beat them. That does wonders for you. I personally picked 11-1. I think they're going to lose at Ohio State, beat Michigan at home, and then you got to just figure out, does Ohio State get to 11-1? Does Michigan get to 11-1? What does that all mean? But I think they'll win on Saturday, and this is a team that just has passed a lot of tests passed a lot of tests so far, just in the eyeball department, but I want to see what they look like in Big Ten action. And I'm sure you're curious to see what Illinois looks like now that they go against Penn State.
Yeah, curious to see what Illinois looks like with 8 days of preparation, reevaluation. We've talked about that, but on paper, Penn State by far their toughest test yet. Tyler Donohue, thanks for letting us know a little bit more about Penn State, a team that I think we'll be watching compete for a college football playoff, depending on what happens on Saturday, if we get shocked or not. Tyler, thank you, man.
Thanks for having me. Take care.